Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing family enterprises ever documented in the annals of American frontier history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and what time of night you're listening to this tale of hospitality turned horror. We're curious to know how far across the world these dark chapters of the Kansas prairie reach their chilling influence. In the windswept plains of southeastern Kansas, where the endless grassland stretched toward horizons that seemed to promise freedom but delivered only isolation, a story of calculated evil unfolded that would haunt the American frontier for generations. This is the documented account of what became known as the Bloody Benders incident, a series of events surrounding a family who transformed the sacred tradition of frontier hospitality into a systematic operation of murder, robbery, and occult ritual that claimed the lives of at least 11 souls between 1871 and 1873. The year was 1871. Kansas had achieved statehood just a decade earlier, emerging from the bloody conflicts that had earned it the name Bleeding Kansas during the tumultuous years leading to the Civil War. The state remained very much a frontier in every sense, its vast prairies dotted with isolated homesteads, small settlements, and the occasional way station that served travelers making the perilous journey westward toward California, Colorado, or the promise of new lives in territories beyond. Along the Great Osage Trail, approximately 16 miles northeast of the settlement that would later become Parsons, Kansas, stood a modest inn and general store that appeared to offer weary travelers exactly what they needed most: food, shelter, and respite from the endless miles of prairie that stretched in every direction. The establishment was operated by a family who called themselves the Benders: John Bender Sr., his wife Elvira, their son John Jr., and their daughter Kate, a young woman whose beauty and mysterious demeanor would become central to one of the most chilling crime sprees in frontier history. Kansas in the early 1870s remained a land where federal authority was distant and often ineffective, where local law enforcement consisted of scattered sheriffs responsible for counties the size of entire eastern states, and where the isolation of prairie life created conditions where systematic predators could operate with virtual impunity. The Great Osage Trail served as a major artery for westward migration, carrying thousands of pioneers, businessmen, and fortune seekers through the empty grasslands where help could be days away, and where disappearances might go unnoticed for weeks or even months. The Bender family had arrived in Labette County in early 1871, claiming to be German immigrants seeking to establish a homestead and contribute to the development of Kansas territory. They purchased 160 acres under the Homestead Act, paying the required fees and filing the appropriate paperwork with territorial authorities who were eager to encourage settlement in the sparsely populated region. The family constructed their establishment with careful attention to the needs of travelers while incorporating modifications that would later prove to serve far more sinister purposes. The building itself was a modest two-story structure typical of frontier construction, but it featured an unusual floor plan that divided the interior space with a heavy canvas curtain that separated the dining area from the family's private living quarters. What made this arrangement particularly significant was that guests were always seated at a specific table positioned directly in front of the canvas curtain, with their backs to the family's private area. This seating arrangement was explained as a courtesy that provided guests with the best view of the prairie through the establishment's single window, but it actually served to position victims precisely where they would be most vulnerable to attack from behind. The family's apparent patriarch, John Bender Sr., was described by contemporary accounts as a man of imposing physical presence but limited education, speaking broken English with a heavy German accent that made communication with travelers somewhat difficult. His wife Elvira, known to most as Ma Bender, was characterized as a stern, forbidding woman who rarely smiled and seemed to watch visitors with suspicious, calculating eyes that missed nothing. Their son, John Bender Jr., had appeared to be in his mid-20s and possessed the same imposing physical build as his father. He was described as simple-minded by most who encountered him, speaking little and following his parents' instructions with the unquestioning obedience of someone who had never learned to think independently. Contemporary accounts suggest he may have suffered from some form of developmental disability that made him an ideal accomplice for criminal activities he might not fully understand. But it was Kate Bender, the family's daughter, who truly captured the attention and imagination of travelers who stopped at the lonely Prairie Inn. Described in contemporary accounts as strikingly beautiful, with dark hair, piercing eyes, and a figure that commanded attention even in the rough frontier environment, Kate possessed a combination of physical attractiveness and mysterious charisma that made her unforgettable to those who encountered her. More intriguing than her beauty, however, were Kate's claims of supernatural abilities. She advertised herself as a spiritualist medium capable of communicating with the dead, healing the sick through psychic powers, and predicting the future through seances and other occult practices. In an era when spiritualism was experiencing a surge of popularity throughout America, particularly in frontier regions where death was a constant companion and people desperately sought connection with lost loved ones, Kate's claimed abilities attracted visitors from considerable distances. The family's operation began modestly, offering simple meals and overnight accommodation to travelers who needed rest during their journeys across the seemingly endless Kansas prairie. The meals were reportedly well prepared and reasonably priced, the beds clean and comfortable by frontier standards, and the family's hospitality initially appeared genuine and welcoming to weary pioneers, grateful for any respite from the hardships of prairie travel. Kate's spiritualist services provided an additional attraction that distinguished the Bender establishment from other way stations along the trail. She conducted seances in a darkened back room, claiming to channel the spirits of deceased relatives and providing comfort to grieving travelers who had lost family members to disease, accidents, or violence during their westward journeys. These sessions, conducted by candlelight with Kate assuming the role of mystical intermediary between the living and the dead, created an atmosphere of otherworldly mystery that fascinated clients and provided the family with additional income. Contemporary newspaper advertisements placed by the family in regional publications provide insight into how they marketed their services to potential victims. A notice that appeared in the Parsons Sun in October 1871 reads, "Bender Inn and General Store, clean accommodations, home-cooked meals, and spiritual consultation available. Miss Kate Bender, gifted medium, provides communication with departed loved ones and healing for ailments of body and spirit. Located on Great Osage Trail, 16 miles northeast of Parsons. All travelers welcome." Another advertisement, published in the Thayer Headlight in early 1872, was more explicit about Kate's claimed supernatural abilities. "Professor Miss Kate Bender can heal all sorts of diseases, can cure blindness, fits, deafness, and all such diseases, also deaf and dumbness. Residence, 14 miles east of Independence, on the road from Independence to Osage Mission. She is well read and will converse in German and English." These advertisements reveal several significant aspects of the family's operation. First, they demonstrate Kate's central role in attracting visitors to the establishment, positioning her as the primary draw rather than simply advertising food and lodging. Second, they show the family's understanding of their target market, travelers who might be carrying significant wealth and who were isolated enough that their disappearance might not be immediately noticed. The first documented irregularities associated with the Bender establishment appear in local newspaper accounts from late 1871, which noted an unusual number of travelers who had reportedly stopped at the inn but never reached their intended destinations. These early reports treated the disappearances as isolated incidents, attributing them to the normal hazards of frontier travel rather than suggesting any pattern of foul play. A report in the Independence Reporter, dated November 15, 1871, provides typical coverage of these early disappearances. Mr. George Newton, a cattle buyer from Newton, Kansas, has been missing for 3 weeks after reportedly stopping at a way station on the Osage Trail. Family members request information regarding his whereabouts. Mr. Newton was carrying substantial funds for cattle purchases and may have been the victim of robbery during his journey. What the newspaper accounts failed to recognize was that multiple disappearances were occurring along the same section of the Osage Trail, all involving travelers who had been seen in the vicinity of the Bender establishment shortly before vanishing. The remote location of the inn, combined with the vast distances involved in prairie travel, and the general assumption that missing persons had simply changed their plans or encountered misfortune elsewhere, prevented recognition of the pattern that was developing. Dr. William York, a physician from Independence, Kansas, became the key figure whose disappearance would ultimately expose the Bender family's crimes. Dr. York had departed Independence on March 9, 1873, traveling the Osage Trail toward Fort Scott on medical business. He was known to be carrying medical supplies, surgical instruments, and a considerable sum of money intended for purchasing additional equipment and medications. Dr. York's brother, Colonel Alexander York, was a prominent figure in Kansas territorial politics and possessed both the resources and the determination to conduct a thorough investigation when the doctor failed to return as scheduled. Unlike previous missing persons whose disappearances had been accepted with frontier resignation, Dr. York's vanishing prompted serious investigative efforts that would ultimately uncover the truth about the Bender family's activities. Colonel York organized a search party that retraced his brother's planned route, questioning residents and business owners along the Osage Trail about any travelers they might have encountered. The search led inevitably to the Bender establishment, where the family claimed that Dr. York had indeed stopped for a meal but had continued his journey the same day, heading southwest toward Osage Mission. Kate Bender, displaying the manipulative skills that had served the family so well, offered to conduct a seance to contact Dr. York's spirit and determine his fate. She claimed that her psychic abilities revealed he had encountered trouble somewhere beyond their establishment, possibly falling victim to road agents or suffering an accident in the vast prairie where his body might never be found. Colonel York, though skeptical of Kate's supernatural claims, was desperate for any information about his brother's fate and agreed to participate in the seance. The session, conducted in the Benders' darkened back room with Kate assuming her familiar role as spiritual medium, represented the first direct confrontation between the family and someone with both the resources and the determination to discover the truth about their activities. During the seance, Kate claimed to receive messages from Dr. York's spirit, indicating that he had been attacked by bandits several miles south of the Bender establishment, and that his body lay somewhere in a remote area where searchers were unlikely to find it. She provided specific details about the alleged attack, describing the number of assailants and the circumstances of the doctor's death with a vividness that seemed to exceed what supernatural communication might reasonably provide. Colonel York's suspicions were aroused not by Kate's supernatural claims, but by her detailed knowledge of circumstances she supposedly had learned only through spiritual communication. Her descriptions of the alleged attack included specific details about Dr. York's medical bag, his traveling clothes, and even the amount of money he had been carrying, information that suggested direct knowledge rather than psychic revelation. More troubling still was the family's behavior during and after the seance. John Bender Sr. and Ma Bender remained present throughout the session, watching Colonel York with suspicious intensity that suggested they were evaluating him as a potential threat, rather than simply observing their daughter's spiritual work. John Jr. lurked in the shadows at the edge of the room, his simple-minded demeanor temporarily replaced by an alert wariness that indicated he understood the significance of the situation. Following the seance, Colonel York noticed that the family seemed eager for him to depart, offering supplies for his continued search and suggesting directions that would take him away from their immediate area. Their hospitality, which had initially seemed genuine, now appeared calculated to encourage his departure as quickly as possible. Colonel York's investigation continued for several days, but he found no trace of his brother along the routes suggested by the Bender family. Local residents reported that Dr. York had indeed been seen in the vicinity of the Bender establishment, but no one recalled seeing him continue his journey beyond that point. The absence of any evidence supporting the family's account of his departure began to suggest that something had happened to Dr. York at or near the Bender Inn. The colonel's suspicions crystallized when he learned from other travelers that the Bender family had a pattern of providing very specific information about the fate of missing persons who had last been seen at their establishment. In every case, the family claimed that the missing travelers had continued their journeys but had encountered misfortune elsewhere, and in several cases, Kate had conducted seances that provided detailed accounts of deaths that had supposedly occurred far from the Bender property. This pattern suggested either remarkable psychic abilities or direct knowledge of crimes that the family claimed to know about only through supernatural means. Colonel York, a pragmatic man with little belief in spiritualism, strongly suspected the latter explanation and began organizing a more systematic investigation of the Bender establishment and its owners. The colonel's investigation was complicated by the family's standing in the local community. Despite their foreign origins and Kate's unusual occupation as a spiritualist, the Benders were generally regarded as respectable settlers who contributed to the local economy and provided valuable services to travelers. They paid their taxes, participated in community activities when their remote location permitted, and had never been accused of any criminal behavior by local authorities. Moreover, the family's claims about the fate of missing travelers were difficult to disprove given the vast distances and dangerous conditions involved in prairie travel. It was entirely plausible that travelers who had stopped at the Bender establishment had later encountered road agents, suffered accidents, or simply decided to change their plans without informing anyone of their intentions. Colonel York's breakthrough came when he expanded his investigation to include detailed examination of the Bender property itself. With the assistance of several other men whose relatives had disappeared along the Osage Trail, he obtained permission to search the area around the inn for any evidence that might explain the unusual number of disappearances associated with the establishment. The search initially focused on the area immediately surrounding the inn, examining the grounds for any signs of disturbance or burial sites that might contain evidence of foul play. The searchers paid particular attention to the family's vegetable garden and orchard, reasoning that freshly dug graves might have been disguised as agricultural activities. It was in the apple orchard behind the inn that searchers made their first horrific discovery. Beneath what appeared to be a normal planting arrangement, they uncovered a shallow grave containing the remains of a man who had been dead for several months. The body was that of a middle-aged traveler whose skull showed clear evidence of having been crushed by a heavy implement, indicating violent death rather than natural causes. This initial discovery prompted more extensive excavation of the orchard and surrounding areas, revealing a systematic burial ground that contained the remains of at least 10 additional victims. The bodies were buried in shallow graves throughout the orchard, their remains showing clear evidence of violent death and their personal effects missing, indicating robbery as well as murder. The discovery of multiple graves confirmed Colonel York's worst suspicions about the Bender family and provided physical evidence of a systematic murder operation that had been conducted over an extended period. The number of victims and the organized nature of their burials suggested careful planning and regular repetition of criminal activities rather than isolated incidents of violence. Each grave told a similar story of violent death, followed by methodical disposal of evidence. The victims had been killed by blows to the head, presumably delivered while they sat at the dining table with their backs to the canvas curtain that separated the guest area from the family's private quarters. The position of the wounds suggested attacks from behind, confirming the strategic importance of the inn's seating arrangement. The victims' personal effects had been systematically removed, indicating robbery as a primary motive for the murders. Money, jewelry, watches, and other valuable items were notably absent from the graves, though some personal effects of limited value had been left with the bodies. This selective removal of valuables suggested that the killings were motivated by material gain rather than psychological compulsions or random violence. Analysis of the remains provided additional insights into the family's methodology. The victims appeared to have been selected based on their perceived wealth and their vulnerability as isolated travelers. Most were middle-aged men traveling alone, carrying business-related funds or personal savings that made them attractive targets for robbery. The physical evidence also suggested that the murders had been committed using a heavy implement, possibly a hammer or similar tool, that could deliver fatal blows with relatively little noise or commotion. This choice of weapon indicated planning and consideration of the practical requirements for conducting murders in a location where noise might attract unwanted attention from other travelers or passing traffic. When news of the discoveries reached the Bender establishment, the family had vanished. Neighbors reported that they had departed suddenly during the night of May 5, 1873, loading their belongings into a wagon and disappearing into the vast Kansas prairie without informing anyone of their destination or intentions. The family's flight confirmed their guilt in the minds of investigators and local residents, transforming them from respected settlers into the most wanted criminals in Kansas territory. A massive manhunt was organized, involving local law enforcement, territorial authorities, and volunteer posses who scoured the prairie for any trace of the fleeing family. The abandoned inn was thoroughly searched, revealing additional evidence of the family's criminal activities. Hidden compartments contained stolen property that could be linked to several of the murder victims, including jewelry, watches, and personal documents that confirmed the identities of some remains found in the orchard. Most significantly, searchers discovered what appeared to be Kate Bender's private journals, written in a combination of English and German, that provided disturbing insights into the family's activities and motivations. The journals revealed that Kate had been the primary architect of the family's criminal enterprise, using her beauty and claimed supernatural abilities to identify and manipulate potential victims. The journals described a systematic approach to murder that involved careful victim selection, precise timing of attacks, and methodical disposal of bodies and evidence. Kate had apparently maintained detailed records of each murder, including assessments of the victims' wealth, descriptions of their personal effects, and observations about the effectiveness of different approaches to luring and killing travelers. One journal entry dated September 15, 1872, provides chilling insight into Kate's mindset. The merchant from Topeka proved most profitable. His belt contained gold pieces totaling $340, and his pocket watch will fetch good price in Independence. Pa's blow was clean and quick. Victim showed no awareness before impact. Burial completed before dawn, with new apple trees planted above. Garden appears natural and attracts no suspicion. Another entry reveals the family's systematic approach to selecting victims. 2 travelers stopped today, but younger man travels with companion who expects his arrival in Parsons tomorrow. Too risky for immediate action. Older man travels alone to Colorado, with substantial funds for land purchase. Better opportunity if he can be convinced to remain overnight for spiritual consultation. The journals also documented Kate's use of seances and spiritualist claims as tools for gathering intelligence about potential victims. She would conduct preliminary sessions during which she encouraged travelers to discuss their personal circumstances, their travel plans, and their financial resources, all under the guise of spiritual communication and healing services. These sessions provided the family with crucial information for determining which travelers were worth murdering and which should be allowed to continue their journeys unharmed. Kate had developed sophisticated techniques for extracting personal information while appearing to provide supernatural services, using the intimate atmosphere of seances to encourage confessions and revelations that travelers would never have shared in normal conversation. The journals revealed that the family had been conducting systematic murder for nearly 2 years, beginning shortly after their arrival in Kansas, and continuing until Dr. York's disappearance prompted the investigation that exposed their crimes. During this period, they had killed at least 11 people and possibly more, acquiring substantial wealth through robbery, while maintaining their appearance as respectable frontier settlers. The manhunt for the Bender family became one of the most extensive criminal investigations in Kansas history, involving hundreds of searchers and generating rewards totaling thousands of dollars for information leading to the family's capture. Newspapers throughout the region published detailed descriptions of the family members and accounts of their crimes, transforming them into some of the most notorious fugitives in American frontier history. Despite the extensive search efforts, no trace of the Bender family was ever found. Reports of sightings came from across the Western Territories, with alleged encounters reported in Colorado, New Mexico, California, and even Mexico itself. However, none of these sightings could be confirmed, and the family seemed to have vanished as completely as if the vast prairie had swallowed them entirely. The investigation did reveal some clues about the family's possible escape route and methods. Evidence suggested that they had carefully planned their flight, converting their stolen wealth into easily transportable forms and establishing potential refuges in remote areas where they might avoid detection. The family's apparent familiarity with multiple routes through the territories suggested they had prepared for the possibility of needing to flee quickly if their crimes were discovered. Some investigators theorized that the family had separated after leaving Kansas, reasoning that 4 people traveling together would be more easily recognized and captured than individuals or smaller groups moving independently. This theory was supported by the diversity of alleged sightings, which seemed to place family members in different locations simultaneously. The most credible post-escape sighting occurred in Texas in 1874, when a family matching the Benders' description was reportedly seen operating a way station similar to their Kansas establishment. Local authorities investigated but found that the suspects had departed hastily, leaving behind evidence that suggested they had been conducting similar criminal activities. Other reports placed Kate Bender in various locations throughout the West, always operating under different names, but allegedly continuing her work as a spiritualist medium. Some of these reports suggested that she had resumed her practice of using seances to identify wealthy clients who could be robbed or murdered, though none of these allegations were ever substantiated with physical evidence. The ultimate fate of the Bender family remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of American frontier history. Despite extensive investigations, substantial rewards, and continuing public interest, no conclusive evidence of their capture or death was ever discovered. They had successfully vanished into the vast anonymity of the Western territories, leaving behind only the gruesome evidence of their crimes and the enduring mystery of their disappearance. The Bender Inn itself became a macabre tourist attraction in the immediate aftermath of the discoveries, with curiosity seekers traveling considerable distances to view the site where such horrific crimes had been committed. Local authorities eventually ordered the building demolished to prevent continued exploitation of the tragedy, though the orchard where the victims were buried remained visible for years afterward. The case had lasting impacts on frontier society and law enforcement practices throughout the Western territories. It demonstrated how isolation and limited governmental authority could create conditions where systematic criminals could operate with virtual impunity, victimizing travelers who had no protection beyond their own vigilance and weapons. The Bender case also highlighted the vulnerabilities of frontier hospitality traditions, showing how criminals could exploit the customs of welcoming strangers and providing aid to travelers. The revelation that such extreme evil could hide behind the appearance of respectable business operations created lasting suspicion and wariness among frontier communities. More specifically, the case contributed to growing awareness of the dangers faced by travelers in remote areas and prompted improvements in communication systems and law enforcement coordination that would make similar crimes more difficult to commit and conceal in the future. The psychological aspects of the Bender crimes have continued to fascinate criminologists and historians. The family's ability to maintain an appearance of respectability while conducting systematic murder demonstrates remarkable compartmentalization and deception skills that exceed those found in typical criminal cases. Kate Bender's role as the apparent mastermind of the operation is particularly intriguing from a criminological perspective. Her combination of physical attractiveness, claimed supernatural abilities, and apparent leadership of the family's criminal activities represents an unusual profile that challenges conventional understanding of female participation in violent crime. Her use of spiritualism as both a cover for criminal activities and a tool for victim selection demonstrates sophisticated manipulation techniques that suggest considerable intelligence and planning ability. The detailed records she maintained of the family's crimes indicate systematic thinking and long-term strategic planning that exceeds the capabilities typically associated with frontier criminals. The family dynamics involved in the Bender crimes also present interesting questions about collective criminal behavior and the psychological mechanisms that allowed multiple family members to participate in systematic murder over an extended period. The apparent division of responsibilities, with Kate serving as the lure and intelligence gatherer, while the male family members provided physical force and labor, suggests a well-organized operation that maximized each member's capabilities. Modern forensic analysis of the crime scenes and victim remains has provided additional insights into the family's methods and the extent of their criminal activities. Examination of the burial sites revealed evidence of careful body disposal techniques that suggest familiarity with decomposition processes and soil conditions, indicating either previous criminal experience or systematic experimentation with corpse disposal methods. The physical evidence also suggests that the family may have been active in criminal activities for longer than initially suspected, possibly operating in other locations before arriving in Kansas. The sophistication of their methods and the apparent ease with which they adapted to frontier conditions indicate experience that might have been acquired through previous criminal enterprises. Contemporary accounts of the Bender case reveal the profound impact these crimes had on frontier communities and the traveling public. The revelation that a family could present such a convincing facade of respectability while conducting systematic murder created lasting paranoia and suspicion that affected legitimate businesses and innocent families throughout the region. Travelers became increasingly wary of isolated establishments and began taking precautions that reflected awareness of the dangers that might lurk behind welcoming facades. The tradition of frontier hospitality, which had been based on mutual trust and the shared understanding that cooperation was essential for survival in remote areas, was permanently altered by the knowledge that such trust could be fatally misplaced. The case also contributed to the development of more systematic approaches to criminal investigation in frontier regions. The success of Colonel York's investigation demonstrated the importance of coordinated efforts and systematic examination of evidence, leading to improvements in law enforcement techniques and interjurisdictional cooperation. The Bender case has continued to influence popular culture and historical scholarship, inspiring numerous books, articles, and fictional adaptations that explore the psychological and social dimensions of these crimes. The combination of family dynamics, frontier setting, and occult elements has made it a subject of enduring fascination that continues to attract new audiences more than a century after the crimes were committed. The site where the Bender Inn once stood remains unmarked today, though local historians and crime enthusiasts occasionally visit the location to contemplate the horrific events that occurred there. The apple orchard where the victims were buried has long since been reclaimed by prairie grass, leaving no visible trace of the graves that once held evidence of systematic murder. Yet the legacy of the Bender crimes continues to serve as a cautionary tale about the capacity for evil that can exist behind the most convincing facades of respectability and hospitality. In an era when travelers routinely trusted strangers for food and shelter, the Bender family exploited that trust to commit crimes that shocked even a frontier society accustomed to violence and sudden death. The story of the inn built on bones remains one of the darkest chapters in the history of the American frontier, a reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from the obvious threats of wild animals, hostile weather, or openly aggressive criminals, but from those who use smiles and hospitality to mask intentions as black as the Kansas prairie nights, where their victims met their final fate. The investigation into the Bender crimes revealed layers of complexity that went far beyond simple robbery and murder. Evidence suggested that the family had been part of a larger network of criminal enterprises operating throughout the frontier territories, using a combination of legitimate businesses and systematic predation to accumulate wealth while avoiding detection by scattered law enforcement agencies. Documents discovered in the abandoned inn included correspondence with individuals in other territories who appeared to be operating similar establishments. These letters, written in coded language that investigators struggled to decipher, suggested coordination between multiple criminal groups who shared information about potential victims, law enforcement activities, and safe routes for moving stolen goods. One partially decoded letter, dated January 1873, included references to productive harvests in Colorado and new planting opportunities in New Mexico that appeared to be metaphorical descriptions of criminal activities rather than legitimate agricultural pursuits. The letter also contained warnings about increased government attention in certain areas and suggestions for relocating operations to more remote locations. This evidence of criminal networking challenged the initial assumption that the Bender family represented an isolated case of frontier violence. Instead, it suggested they were part of a sophisticated criminal infrastructure that had adapted to the unique conditions and opportunities of westward expansion, exploiting the mobility and anonymity that characterized frontier life to conduct systematic predation on a scale previously unrecognized. The family's apparent connections to other criminal enterprises also helped explain their remarkable success in avoiding detection for nearly 2 years. Their ability to accurately assess which travelers were worth murdering and which should be left unharmed suggested access to intelligence networks that provided information about the movements and resources of potential victims before they arrived at the inn. Further investigation revealed that Kate Bender's spiritualist activities extended beyond simple victim selection and included participation in a broader occult community that operated throughout the Western territories. Evidence suggested that spiritualist networks, which had become increasingly popular in post-Civil War America, were being exploited by criminal groups who used seances and spiritual consultations as covers for intelligence gathering and victim identification. Kate's journals contained references to other spiritualist practitioners who shared information about wealthy clients and coordinated activities to maximize criminal opportunities while minimizing risks of exposure. This network appeared to operate through a combination of coded correspondence, traveling practitioners who moved between establishments, and regional gatherings that served as criminal conventions disguised as spiritual conferences. The sophistication of this criminal infrastructure became more apparent as investigators examined the physical evidence left behind at the Bender establishment. Hidden compartments in the inn's walls contained not only stolen property from murder victims, but also supplies and equipment that suggested preparation for activities far beyond simple robbery and murder. Among these discoveries were chemicals and apparatus for document forgery, including inks, papers, and seals that could be used to create false identification papers, property deeds, and financial instruments. The family apparently had been engaged in systematic fraud operations that complemented their murder activities, using forged documents to claim ownership of their victims' property and convert stolen goods into legitimate assets. The forgery operation was particularly sophisticated, suggesting either extensive training or collaboration with experts in document falsification. Analysis of the recovered materials revealed that the family had been producing false papers of quality sufficient to pass casual inspection by frontier officials who lacked the resources or expertise to detect sophisticated forgeries. This discovery explained how the family had been able to convert their criminal proceeds into seemingly legitimate wealth without attracting suspicion from local authorities. Rather than simply accumulating stolen goods that might be recognized, they had been systematically converting their plunder into legal assets through fraudulent documentation that established their ownership of property and funds acquired through murder. The family's criminal activities also extended to systematic grave robbing and corpse trafficking, as evidenced by tools and materials found in their establishment that were consistent with exhuming and processing human remains. Contemporary medical schools and anatomical research facilities paid substantial sums for fresh cadavers, creating a market that criminal groups could exploit by providing bodies obtained through murder or grave robbery. Kate's journals contained references to medical deliveries and anatomical consultations that appeared to describe the sale of murder victims' bodies to medical institutions throughout the region. This practice not only provided additional income, but also helped dispose of evidence that might otherwise have exposed their crimes much earlier. The body trafficking operation required considerable logistical sophistication, including preservation techniques, transportation methods, and distribution networks that connected rural criminal operations with urban medical facilities. The Bender family's remote location and their cover as legitimate frontier settlers provided ideal conditions for such activities, allowing them to process and ship bodies without attracting unwanted attention. Evidence of the family's involvement in body trafficking also helped explain some of the unusual features of their inn's construction. The reinforced floors, sophisticated drainage systems, and chemical processing facilities that had initially seemed designed for murder and body disposal were apparently also intended to support a commercial operation that required technical capabilities for preserving and preparing corpses for medical sale. The discovery of this additional criminal dimension transformed understanding of the Bender case from a series of isolated murders motivated by simple robbery to a complex criminal enterprise that integrated multiple illegal activities into a systematic business operation. The family had apparently created a comprehensive criminal infrastructure that maximized profits while minimizing risks through diversification and vertical integration of their illegal activities. This broader understanding of their operations also provided new insights into the family's escape and their ability to evade capture despite extensive manhunts. Their connections to criminal networks throughout the Western territories would have provided access to safe houses, false identities, and transportation resources that enabled them to disappear more completely than isolated criminals could have managed. The investigation also revealed that the Bender family's criminal activities had been enabled by systematic corruption of local officials who had been bribed or blackmailed into ignoring suspicious activities and preventing thorough investigations of missing persons reports. Evidence found in the inn included detailed records of payments made to various territorial officials and documentation of compromising information that could be used to ensure continued cooperation. This corruption network extended beyond simple bribery to include sophisticated blackmail operations that exploited the personal weaknesses and illegal activities of officials throughout the region. Kate's journals contained detailed profiles of local authorities that included information about their gambling debts, sexual indiscretions, and involvement in various illegal schemes that made them vulnerable to manipulation. The family had apparently spent considerable effort identifying and exploiting these vulnerabilities, creating a protective network of compromised officials who actively assisted in covering up their crimes rather than simply looking the other way. This systematic corruption helped explain how such an extensive murder operation could continue undetected despite generating numerous missing persons reports and attracting periodic attention from concerned relatives and associates. The corruption network also provided early warning systems that alerted the family to impending investigations or increased law enforcement attention, enabling them to adjust their activities or prepare for flight before serious threats to their operation could develop. Their sudden departure immediately before Colonel York's investigation reached the point of discovering physical evidence suggests they had received advance warning from compromised officials. Analysis of the family's financial records revealed the enormous scope of their criminal enterprise and the wealth they had accumulated through nearly 2 years of systematic murder, fraud, and body trafficking. Conservative estimates based on recovered documentation suggested they had acquired assets equivalent to several $100,000 in contemporary currency, making them among the most financially successful criminal groups operating in the frontier territories. The family's wealth accumulation strategy demonstrated sophisticated understanding of frontier economics and the opportunities created by westward expansion. Rather than simply hoarding stolen goods or currency that might be difficult to transport or convert, they had systematically invested their criminal proceeds in portable assets and financial instruments that could be easily liquidated or transferred if circumstances required rapid relocation. Their investment strategy also included acquisition of legitimate business interests in multiple territories, creating a network of assets that could provide income and cover for criminal activities while establishing the appearance of respectable business success. This approach to wealth management demonstrated long-term strategic thinking that exceeded the capabilities typically associated with frontier criminals. The sophistication of the family's operations was further revealed through analysis of their victim selection criteria and murder scheduling practices. Rather than killing randomly or opportunistically, they had developed systematic approaches for identifying optimal targets and timing attacks to minimize risks while maximizing profits. Kate's journals contained detailed victim profiles that evaluated potential targets based on multiple criteria, including wealth assessments, travel schedules, social connections, and likelihood of generating immediate investigation if they disappeared. This systematic evaluation process enabled the family to focus their criminal activities on victims whose elimination would provide maximum benefit while creating minimum risk of exposure. The family's scheduling practices also demonstrated careful consideration of external factors that might affect their operations. They avoided committing murders during periods of increased travel, when witnesses might be present, coordinated their activities to avoid conflicts with local events that might bring additional people to their area, and planned disposal activities to coincide with weather conditions that would facilitate concealment of evidence. This level of operational sophistication required extensive planning, careful record-keeping, and continuous intelligence gathering that transformed what might have been a series of opportunistic crimes into a systematic business operation with clearly defined procedures and performance metrics. The psychological dimensions of the Bender crimes have continued to fascinate researchers and criminologists seeking to understand how an entire family could participate in systematic murder while maintaining appearances of respectability and normal family relationships. The case presents unique challenges for understanding criminal psychology because it involves multiple perpetrators operating within a family structure over an extended period. Kate Bender's role as the apparent architect of the family's criminal enterprise represents a particularly unusual psychological profile that challenges conventional understanding of female participation in violent crime. Her combination of physical attractiveness, claimed supernatural abilities, and apparent leadership of systematic murder operations suggests a personality structure that integrated multiple forms of manipulation and deception into a coherent criminal methodology. Her use of spiritualism as both a legitimate business practice and a tool for criminal victim selection demonstrates remarkable compartmentalization abilities that allowed her to provide genuine comfort to some clients while systematically identifying others for murder. This dual functionality required sophisticated psychological manipulation skills that exceeded those found in typical criminal cases. The family dynamics that enabled sustained participation in systematic murder by all family members also present interesting questions about collective criminal behavior and the psychological mechanisms that prevent normal moral constraints from operating in group settings. The apparent acceptance of murder as a routine business practice suggests psychological adaptation processes that transformed extreme violence into normalized family activities. Evidence from Kate's journals suggests that the family had developed elaborate rationalization systems that justified their crimes as necessary responses to the harsh realities of frontier life. References to victims as harvest and murders as business opportunities indicate psychological distancing techniques that reduce their actions to abstract economic transactions rather than human destruction. The family's ability to maintain normal social relationships with neighbors and community members while conducting systematic murder also demonstrates remarkable deception capabilities that suggest either extensive criminal experience or natural talents for manipulation that exceeded normal human capacities for dishonesty. Modern forensic analysis of the crime scenes and victim remains has provided additional insights into the family's methods and the actual extent of their criminal activities. Advanced techniques for analyzing soil composition, bone trauma patterns, and decomposition processes have revealed evidence that was not available to original investigators, creating more complete understanding of how the murders were committed and how many victims were actually involved. Forensic examination of the burial sites revealed evidence of more sophisticated body disposal techniques than initially suspected, including chemical treatment of remains to accelerate decomposition and careful arrangement of graves to maximize concealment while minimizing disturbance of the surrounding landscape. These techniques suggest familiarity with forensic countermeasures that exceeded the knowledge typically available to frontier criminals. Analysis of trauma patterns on recovered remains has also provided insights into the specific methods used to kill victims and the level of violence involved in the murders. Evidence suggests that the family used multiple killing techniques depending on circumstances and victim characteristics, indicating tactical flexibility and systematic experimentation with different approaches to murder. The forensic evidence also supports theories about the family's involvement in body trafficking operations, with some remains showing evidence of post-mortem medical procedures that suggest preparation for anatomical sale rather than simple disposal. This evidence confirms that the family's criminal activities extended beyond robbery and murder to include systematic exploitation of their victims' bodies for additional profit. Contemporary accounts of the Bender case provide insights into the profound impact these crimes had on frontier communities and the broader American society. The revelation that an entire family could present such a convincing facade of respectability while conducting systematic murder created lasting changes in public attitudes toward frontier hospitality and trust in isolated establishments. Newspaper coverage of the case, which continued for months after the family's disappearance, reveals the extent to which the crimes captured public imagination and influenced popular understanding of frontier dangers. The combination of family dynamics, occult elements, and systematic murder created a narrative that combined multiple forms of fear and fascination into a compelling story that resonated with audiences throughout the nation. The case also influenced popular culture representations of frontier life, contributing to literary and theatrical works that explored themes of hidden evil and deceptive appearances in frontier settings. The image of the welcoming inn that concealed systematic murder became a recurring motif in American Gothic literature and continues to influence contemporary portrayals of frontier horror. The Bender case's impact on law enforcement practices throughout the Western Territories was equally significant. The success of Colonel York's investigation in exposing the crimes demonstrated the importance of systematic investigation techniques and interjurisdictional cooperation, leading to improvements in communication systems and coordination protocols that made similar crimes more difficult to commit and conceal. The case also highlighted the vulnerabilities created by inadequate law enforcement resources in frontier regions and contributed to political pressure for expanded federal involvement in territorial law enforcement. The realization that criminal networks could exploit jurisdictional boundaries and resource limitations to conduct systematic predation prompted legislative and administrative changes that strengthened law enforcement capabilities throughout the Western Territories. Legal precedents established during the Bender investigation also influenced subsequent criminal cases, particularly in areas related to family-based criminal enterprises, evidence preservation in remote locations, and prosecution of crimes that crossed territorial boundaries. The case helped establish legal frameworks that remained relevant for decades as the Western Territories developed more sophisticated criminal justice systems. The economic impact of the Bender crimes extended beyond the immediate losses suffered by their victims to include broader effects on frontier commerce and travel patterns. The revelation that criminals could operate systematic murder operations while maintaining appearances of legitimate business created lasting suspicion that affected genuine establishments throughout the region. Travel patterns along the Great Osage Trail and other frontier routes were permanently altered by awareness of the dangers that might lurk behind welcoming facades. Travelers developed new precautions and security practices that reflected understanding that hospitality could mask deadly intentions, fundamentally changing the social dynamics of frontier travel. The case also influenced the development of frontier business practices, as legitimate establishments found it necessary to provide additional assurances of safety and respectability to overcome suspicions created by the Bender revelations. These changes included formal certification systems, improved communication with law enforcement agencies, and voluntary transparency measures that helped distinguish legitimate businesses from potential criminal operations. The enduring mystery of the Bender family's fate has continued to generate speculation and investigation more than a century after their disappearance. Despite extensive searches, substantial rewards, and continuing public interest, no conclusive evidence of their capture, death, or subsequent activities has ever been discovered, making their case one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. Theories about their fate have ranged from suggestions that they successfully escaped to other countries to speculations that they were killed by vigilante groups who never reported their actions. Some researchers have suggested that the family separated and continued criminal activities under different identities, while others have proposed that they abandoned crime entirely and lived out their lives as respectable citizens in remote locations. The absence of conclusive evidence about their ultimate fate has contributed to the enduring fascination with the Bender case and has inspired numerous amateur investigations, historical research projects, and popular culture adaptations that continue to explore the mystery of their disappearance. Recent advances in forensic technology and historical research methods have prompted renewed interest in the case among professional investigators and academic researchers. DNA analysis techniques, advanced soil analysis methods, and improved historical research resources have created new possibilities for discovering evidence that might resolve some of the remaining questions about the family's crimes and their ultimate fate. Archaeological investigations at the site of the former Bender Inn have revealed additional evidence about the family's activities and the extent of their criminal operations. These investigations have uncovered physical evidence that was not available to original investigators, including artifacts that confirm the family's involvement in document forgery, body trafficking, and other criminal activities beyond simple murder and robbery. The site investigations have also revealed evidence of more extensive burial activities than were initially discovered, suggesting that the family's murder operation may have claimed more victims than the 11 bodies that were recovered during the original investigation. Soil analysis and ground-penetrating radar surveys have identified additional areas of disturbance that may contain more graves, though these potential burial sites have not yet been fully excavated. These ongoing investigations continue to provide new insights into one of the most notorious criminal cases in American frontier history, demonstrating that the Bender mystery still has the power to reveal new secrets more than 150 years after the crimes were committed. The Bender case has also contributed to academic research in multiple disciplines, including criminology, psychology, anthropology, and frontier history. The case provides unique insights into criminal behavior patterns, family dynamics in extreme circumstances, the development of law enforcement practices, and the social conditions that enabled systematic predation in frontier settings. Research based on the Bender case has influenced understanding of serial murder, criminal networks, family-based criminal enterprises, and the psychological mechanisms that enable sustained participation in extreme violence. The case continues to be studied as an example of how criminal groups can exploit social conditions and institutional weaknesses to conduct systematic predation while avoiding detection. The case has also contributed to understanding of frontier social dynamics, including the role of hospitality traditions, the vulnerability of isolated communities, and the challenges of maintaining law and order in sparsely populated regions. These insights remain relevant for understanding criminal behavior patterns and law enforcement challenges in contemporary remote areas. Today, the site where the Bender Inn once stood remains largely unmarked, though it continues to attract visitors interested in the history of one of America's most notorious criminal families. The location serves as a reminder of the capacity for evil that can exist behind the most convincing facades of respectability, and the importance of maintaining vigilance against those who would exploit trust and hospitality for deadly purposes. The legacy of the inn built on bones continues to influence popular culture, historical scholarship, and public understanding of the dangers that characterized frontier life. The case serves as a permanent reminder that the most dangerous predators are often those who appear most trustworthy, most welcoming, and most eager to provide exactly what vulnerable travelers need most desperately. As we travel modern highways and stay in establishments run by strangers, the Bender case serves as a chilling reminder that evil can wear any face and that the capacity for systematic predation remains a constant threat that requires eternal vigilance to detect and prevent. The story of the Kansas family who transformed hospitality into horror remains one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history, and a cautionary tale that continues to resonate with each new generation that encounters their terrible legacy.